Hello guys, so today I'm going to discuss the part 8 of the Sage Handbook Qualitative Research Design. It is titled as Designing Qualitative Research for Specific Groups and Areas, which contains 8 chapters. So the first chapter is Designing Qualitative Research with the Elderly. Using theories when designing qualitative research with older individuals. Theories and philosophical worldviews shape how researchers design studies on aging. They influence research questions, data collection, analysis, and interpretation based on Creswell 2014. Theoretical approaches. Constructivism. It focuses on how older people construct their own experiences of aging. Transformative. It examines social inequalities affecting older adults, such as ageism, gender bias, and economic disparities. And lastly, pragmatism, which focuses on solving real-world problems related to aging. It is often used in evaluating interventions, improving healthcare, and informing policy. Next, we have basic qualitative research designs with the elderly. Qualitative research on aging involves various research designs that can either be applied separately or combined to explore the experiences of older individuals. Case study design. It focuses on providing a detailed description or reconstruction of cases, such as individuals, communities, or institutions. Examples are nursing homes, hospitals. Challenges. Identifying appropriate cases and selecting relevant data collection methods. Examples, interviews and observations. Second is the comparative research design. It focuses on examining multiple cases concerning a specific issue, comparing different groups' perspectives. Challenges. Selecting comparable cases and maintaining standardization across variables. Third is the participatory research design. Focus actively involves older adults in different research stages, from designing interview questions to data collection and analysis. Challenges. Managing participant expectations and ensuring inclusivity. Retrospective qualitative design. It focuses on reconstructing past events through interviews and historical documents. It is often used in life course and biographical research. Challenges: selecting reliable participants and mitigating recall bias. Lastly is the longitudinal qualitative design. It focuses on studying change over time by collecting data at multiple time points, offering insight into evolving experiences. So its challenges are retaining elderly participants over extended periods. So the next chapter is designing qualitative research with children. In designing qualitative research with children, we have methods, which are royal and ambulatory methods. Royal methods refers to the traditional, structured approaches that impose control over research design and outcomes, while ambulatory methods are more flexible, participatory, and child-centered approaches that adapt to children's movements, interaction, and spontaneous expressions. We can use these methods by using open-ended exploratory techniques like play-based methods, ethnographic observations, and child-led storytelling. Next is the lines of ascent and descent. Lines of ascent refers to the growth, learning, new possibilities, and the emergence of unexpected insights in research. And lines of descent are structures, limitations, and constraints imposed by institutions, methodologies, and researcher biases. Recognizing this both in research allows for balance, acknowledging constraints, while leaving room for emergence and creativity. So the microfascism of researchers. Microfascism, subtle ways power operates within research, shaping how children's voices are interpreted or constrained. Application, avoiding rigid methodologies that silence or distort children's perspective, ensuring participatory, co-constructed knowledge rather than adult-imposed narratives. Lastly is the deterritorializing gender, beyond fixed categories. Recognizing that children's experiences of gender are fluid, shaped by culture. play, language, and social interactions. Application. Using research methods that allow children to express gender in their own terms, avoiding binary assumptions, and recognizing diverse experiences. The next chapter is physical and embodied ethnography. This chapter has 5 sections. Let's start first with surveying the field. This section provides an overview of how physical culture has been studied through embodied ethnography. Here we have embodiment. It is the idea that knowledge is experienced and understood through the body. Phenomenology, studying lived experiences from a first-person perspective. Theories of the body. Contributions from Bourdieu, Habitus, Foucault, Discipline, Butler, Performativity, and Turner, Bodily Capital. Physical culture, the study of movement-based practices like sports, fitness, martial arts, and dance as cultural expressions. Next, we have examples from the field. This section provides case studies of how researchers have used embodied ethnography in different physical culture contexts. Participant observation. The researcher engages in physical practices rather than merely observing. Autoethnography. Personal experiences of the researcher serve as data. Pain and pleasure in movement. Understanding how bodily sensations shape cultural meaning. Gender, race, and power in physical culture. Examining how identity influences participation experiences. Examples. Boxing by Wakwant 1992. How boxers embody discipline and social class. Yoga by Bats Maddox 2015. The intersection of mindfulness, fitness, and cultural appropriation. Moving on, we have designing embodied ethnography. This section explores methodological strategies for conducting embodied research in physical culture. Embodied co-presence. The researcher shares physical space and activity with participants. Ethical consideration. Addressing consent, safety, and positionality in physically demanding research. Immersive data collection, using field notes, interviews, and sensory documentation to capture experiences. Design process. You need to know what is your role as researcher. And after that, you develop research questions. Next is consider some theoretical perspectives, field notes and reflexivity, and lastly, generating and analyzing data. You have key questions for design. How will the researcher physically participate in the culture being studied? What ethical boundaries must be considered? Example, injuries, consent, or vulnerability. How does one balance participation with critical distance? The next section is developing the research questions. This section focuses on crafting research questions that effectively capture the embodied experience in physical culture. Sensory and affective research. Questions should address how the body feels, responds, and interacts in physical settings. Reflexivity, recognizing how the researcher's body and identity shapes the study. Cultural context of physical practices, understanding how movement relates to social norms and structures. We have here some examples of research questions. How does training in martial arts shape an individual's sense of discipline and identity? What does it feel like to be watched while performing in a competitive sport? How do physical practices reinforce or challenge traditional gender roles? The last section is reflexively chronicling the field. So this section emphasizes the role of field notes in documenting and analyzing embodied experiences. Reflexivity. The researcher critically reflects on their own bodily experiences and biases. Writing the body, capturing movement, sensation, pain, and emotion in descriptive detail. Interpretation and meaning making, transforming raw experience into academic site. We have here some field note techniques. First is the descriptive notes, recording physical sensations, movements, and environment details. Analytical notes, interpreting the meaning behind bodily experiences. Personal reflections, considering how the researcher's own body and identity shape the study. Next chapter is challenges in designing qualitative research when working with hard to reach groups. The first challenge we have is access and contact. Challenges. Hard to reach groups may have distrust in researchers due to historical exploitation or fear of legal consequences. Gatekeepers, example, community leaders, NGOs, may control access, creating additional layers of negotiation. Participants may be geographically dispersed or transient, making sustained contact difficult. So we have strategies for improvement. Establish trust through long-term engagement, community partnerships, and culturally sensitive approaches. Use intermi- intermediaries such as social workers or local leaders who have established relationships with the community. Adopt flexible communication strategies, including informal interactions, online outreach, or mobile research units. The next challenge we have is sampling and recruitment. Challenges. Traditional probability sampling methods often fail with hidden or mobile populations. Participants may hesitate to engage due to stigma, fear, or legal concerns. Over-reliance on gatekeepers may result in biased samples, excluding those without strong social ties. Strategies for improvement. Use use snowball sampling, where initial participants refer others, helping researchers reach hidden networks. Employ respondent-driven sampling, or RDS, to reduce selection bias and ensure a more diverse sample. Ensure flexibility in recruitment, meeting participants in familiar and comfortable settings. Next are the methods. Challenges. Standard qualitative methods, like structured interviews, focus groups, may not be effective due to distrust, language barriers, or mobility. Participants may be unwilling or unable to engage in long sessions. Documentation, audio or video recording may be seen as intrusive. Strategies for improvement. Use participatory methods such as photo booths, storytelling, or community mapping, allowing participants to guide the research process. Incorporate digital methods, including anonymous online surveys or messaging apps for populations with safety concerns. Adopt flexible interview formats, such as informal conversations or mobile interviews conducted in safe, accessible locations. Lastly is the matter of ethics. Challenges. Obtaining informed consent can be difficult due to low literacy, language barriers, or legal status. Protecting confidentiality is crucial, especially for groups at risk of harm. Examples are undocumented migrants, survivors of violence. Power imbalances may influence participant responses. Strategies for improvement. Use verbal consent or culturally appropriate consent processes, ensuring participants fully understand their rights. Ensure confidentiality and anonymity by using pseudonyms, encrypted data storage, and a non-identifiable reporting. Engage in participatory ethics, where communities co-develop research protocols to align with their values. Of Offer reciprocity, ensuring the research benefits participants. Examples by sharing findings, providing resources, or advocating for policy change. Next chapter is intersecting identities in healthcare research. Let's have a brief overview in intersecting identities. Intersectionality explains how multiple social factors combine to shape healthcare access and outcomes. Example, a black transgender woman faces unique healthcare barriers compared to a white transgender woman or a black cisgender woman. Identities do not operate in isolation. They overlap and influence each other. Now let's move on to the core themes and social justice orientation. Power and privilege in healthcare is how social status influences medical treatment. Cumulative disadvantage, how multiple marginalized identities compound discrimination. Social justice focus, it is the role of researchers in advocating for equitable healthcare policies. Next is bridging essentialism and constructionism. Essentialism, it is the belief that identities have fixed characteristics. Example, all women experience healthcare similarly. Constructionism, identities are shaped by social and historical factors, like class, culture, and race affect women's health differently. Intersectional research design bridges these two views for a more accurate understanding of patient experiences. From theory to practice, intersectional research methods. Narrative inquiry collects personal stories for real-world insights. Ethnography observes healthcare interactions within communities. Participatory research engages marginalized groups in study design. Lastly is applied theory, social stigma in healthcare. Stigma negatively affects health by preventing people from seeking treatment, leading to misdiagnosis or medical neglect, increasing mental health burdens. Example, a Muslim woman wearing a hijab may avoid seeking reproductive health care due to cultural insensitivity from providers. Here we have a case study, social stigma of PCOS, or polycystic ovary syndrome. It is a common hormonal disorder in women, but its intersection with gender expectations, body image, and reproductive health creates unique challenges. Medical dismissal. Symptoms often attributed to weight rather than hormones. Second is the societal pressure. PCOS symptoms, such as weight gain and infertility, conflict with societal expectations of femininity. Lastly is the mental health impact. Women with PCOS often experience anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem due to stigma. The next chapter is researching institutions after the discursive turn. Discourse research on institutions. Discourse research provides a powerful lens for understanding how institutions operate through language. Two key examples illustrate this approach. Policy discourse in the European Union. Researchers analyze how policy documents, speeches, and debates shape the EU's governance structure. The framing of integration or sovereignty in policy discussions influences institutional decision-making and, and public perception. Second is the healthcare institutions and professional identity. Studies on medical institutions reveal how doctors, nurses, and patients use language to construct authority, negotiate power, and define healthcare roles. Terms like patient-centered care shape interactions and institutional policies. These cases demonstrate that institutions are not just formal structures, but are continuously shaped by discourse. Next, we have theoretical sources of institution research. This chapter outlines key theoretical influences that have contributed to discourse research on institutions, including Michael Foucault's governmentality theory, examines how institutions regulate behavior through discourse, norms, and surveillance. Pierre Bourdieu's concepts of field and habitus explains how social structures influence institutional actions through ingrained practices and discursive positioning. Critical discourse analysis, or CDA. It focuses on how language reinforces or challenges power relations within institutions. These theoretical sources help researchers understand how institutions maintain authority and adapt through discursive practices. Performing the discursive turn in institution studies. The discursive turn makes a shift from studying institutions as static structures to viewing them as dynamic spaces shaped by language and social interactions. This shift is explored through three key This shift is explored through three key transformations. From government to governmentality, traditional studies focus on governance as a top-down process. The governmentality perspective, or focal, examines how institutions shape individuals' behavior through discourse, regulation, and self-discipline. Example: public health campaigns encourage citizens to take personal responsibility for their well-being, reinforcing state objectives through discourse. Second, from level to field. Institutional research previously categorized governance at local, national, or international levels. The field perspective Bourdieu suggests that institutions operate in overlapping social fields with competing interests and discourses. And lastly, from habitus to genre. Traditional studies focus on habitus, the ingrained behaviors and norms guiding institutional actions. The genre perspective emphasizes how institutions use specific communication styles and texts. Example: legal documents, scientific reports, to maintain legitimacy. Example: courts rely on legal language to uphold authority and structure legal discourse. These transformations illustrate how discourse analysis reveals the hidden power dynamics in institutions. Lastly, we have designing a discourse study of institutions. A well-structured discourse study requires a clear framework, balancing theory and methodology. Key considerations include general research design, establishing research objectives, like understanding how media influences policy discourse, selecting data sources, like speeches, official reports, interviews, choosing analytical methods. Sample are thematic analysis, textual analysis, and discourse tracing. Meta-theory and epistemology. Researchers must define their philosophical stance, like critical realism versus constructivism. Questions to consider. Is institutional discourse shaped by material realities, or does language construct those realities? Third is the discourse analytical strategy and EU organic agricultural policy. Case study. The EU's organic farming policies are shaped by competing discourses on sustainability, economics, and consumer preferences. Researchers analyze policy documents and debates to reveal underlying power struggles. Lastly is the discourse analytical strategy and the EU Constitution. Case study. The failed EU Constitutional Treaty, 2005, shows how discourse influences political outcomes. Conflicting national narratives on sovereignty and identity, shaped by public perception, and led to the treaty's rejection. These examples illustrate how discourse studies uncover the narratives and power structures driving institutional decisions. Moving on to the next chapter, designing qualitative research for studies in Asia, decentering research practices for local norms of relevance. Validating the local, pulling the threads together. One of the key concerns in qualitative research in Asia is ensuring that local knowledge, traditions, and linguistic practices are validated rather than overshadowed by Western frameworks. This section explores various aspects of validating local research practices. Translanguaging possibilities and pitfalls. Translanguaging refers to using multiple languages fluidly in academic and research settings. In multilingual Asian contexts, researchers often switch between local languages, national languages, and English. Possibilities. More inclusive participation, especially from marginalized communities, enables richer data collection in participants' native collections. Pitfalls. English remains dominant in academic publishing, limiting recognition of local research, risk of misinterpretation when translating context-dependent terms. Reshaping EMI, English Medium Instruction. Many Asian universities adopt English medium instruction or EMI to gain global academic recognition. However, EMI or English medium instruction often disadvantages students and researchers whose primary language is not English. Key concerns: language barriers limit expression of local perspectives. Academic prestige is still tied to publishing in English language journals. Suggested reforms: encouraging bilingual or multilingual research outputs, promoting local language journals with international recognition. The supervision of research. Research supervision models in Asia often follow Western structures but may not fit local cultural and academic traditions. Challenges: hierarchical relationships between supervisors and students can discourage critical engagement. Western research methodologies are often prioritized over local approaches. Recommendations: adopting collaborative supervision models that respect local mentorship traditions, allowing flexibility in methodological approaches to include indigenous and community-based research. Next is the qualitative research and validating the local. Asian qualitative research should not merely adopt Western methods, but instead build indigenous research frameworks. Examples of localized research approaches: oral history traditions in Southeast Asia as a form of data collection, community-based participatory research grounded in local customs and relationships. Call to action: academic institutions should prioritize research methodologies that respect and validate local knowledge systems. Decentering and validating research design considerations. In order to ensure qualitative research is culturally and contextually relevant, research designs should be decentered from Western paradigms and validated within local frameworks. Decentering research design, moving away from universalizing theories and embracing local epistemologies. Recognizing that Asian knowledge are diverse, requiring flexible methodologies. Validating research design, ensuring research aligns with cultural, linguistic, and social norms, using ethnographic, participatory, and narrative approaches that reflect lived experiences. Ethical considerations. Avoid Avoid extractive research models where foreign scholars collect data without benefiting local communities. Emphasize co-creation of knowledge between researchers and participants. So now, the last chapter, which is designing qualitative research for studies in Latin America. Here we have social science for Latin America. Martin Barro, a Spanish Jesuit priest who later becomes Salvadoran, critiques the dependence of Latin American social sciences on North American models. He highlights two central problems: scientist mimicry, adopting foreign methods uncritically, and a lack of adequate epistemology, building theories on unquestioned assumptions. He identifies five problem assumptions. First, we have positivism, prioritizing empirical data while ignoring the social context and purpose of knowledge. This limits the potential for social change. Individualism, treating individuals as the primary unit of analysis, which overlooks systematic social, political, and economic structures. Hedonism, assuming human behavior is motivated by personal pleasure, which disregards collective solidarity, especially among marginalized communities. Homeostatic vision, valuing social stability and order over recognizing conflict and crisis as part of Latin American history and struggle. Ahistorism, viewing human nature as universal, ignoring historical and cultural differences between societies, such as comparing an MIT student to a Nicaraguan peasant. Design consideration. At least three considerations need to be taken into account when designing studies in Latin American. The critical and situated use of theories. Researchers must critically assess theories to ensure that they are relevant to the specific Latin American context. Instead of applying Western theories without adaptation, scholars should integrate local perspectives, indigenous knowledge, and historical context. Theoretical frameworks should be flexible and responsive to the lived experiences of participants. Second is the verticality of relationships in which the researcher participates. Latin American societies often have hierarchical social structures, which can influence research interactions. Researchers must be aware of power imbalances between themselves and participants, like academic versus community members, urban versus rural populations. Building trust and fostering equal relationships with participants can lead to more ethical and meaningful data collection. Lastly is the anticipating the difficulties for knowledge dissemination. Many research findings remain inaccessible to local communities due to language barriers, academic jargon, or paywall publications. Researchers should plan for alternative dissemination methods, such as community workshops, open access publications, or creative formats like storytelling and visual media. Institutional and governmental restrictions may also limit the reach of critical research, require strategic advocacy and partnerships for broader impact. Practical guidance about qualitative research design in Latin America. Latin American researchers face marginalization in global academia, but some have sought to develop transformative and participatory research methodologies to address local injustices. The text highlights four key principles of participatory research. 1. Participation, involving research participants not only in data collection, but also in interpretation and reporting. Second is the empowerment, raising awareness among oppressed groups to help them change their reality. Third, reciprocity, ensuring that both researchers and participants benefit from the research rather than exploiting local communities. Lastly is the transformation. The ultimate goal is to change oppressive conditions and facilitate empowerment. And that is all of my discussions about the part 8 of the SAGE Handbook Qualitative Design. Thank you for listening.